disruptors in this room are celebrated. Disruptors in education are vilified. Is that fair? Is that, I mean, both of you have experienced that in a big way in trying to do your jobs. Has that been the hardest part?
Well, first, I want to say thanks for having us, and also it's a little humbling to share the stage with this giant to my right. I'm a proud Teach for America alumni, and I was the first alumni to be appointed as a superintendent in the country because Joel took a risk. And to your point, and to the theme of dare, that's not common. You know, usually folks are teachers for X number of years, and then principals, and then they work in the central office, and they may become superintendents. And Joel really broke the mold and took a risk on me. In the education space, he's a rock star. He is the Mick Jagger of school reform with a little bit less hair, I guess.
I thought this was going to be a no bullshit panel.
Yes, exactly.
That's what they said early today.
So anyway,
let's get over all of that.
Anyway, he is the Mick Jagger. But yeah, I do think that to the theme of dare, it is, and you saw him say it in the opening clip, there is a way in which the education establishment is very wedded to a status quo that is horribly broken and is willing to accept failure on the backs of our children at the expense of some sort of truce or peace or a past that never existed in terms of educational equity. It's puzzling to me.
No. The reason that disruptors are disliked and are driven out oftentimes is because the system actually works pretty well for the bureaucrats and for the adults and for the politicians. So they come together to protect the system. But I want to frame this discussion with 2 points that if they don't get you upset, then nothing will. The first is, there's not a person in this room who doesn't care about income inequality and the growing gap in our country today. We talk about it, we worry about it, and yet today, the kids with the greatest needs get the crummiest education systematically throughout the country, and we tolerate it. So what hope is there for these kids who start out with the deck stacked against them, and then they pile on top of that a crummy education, and then we wonder why the gaps keep widening in the country? And the second thing that strikes me to frame this debate is everyone in this room insisted on choice for your kids. There's not a single person here who would allow me to randomly assign your kid to a school in Newark or LA or New York or any place else. And you all are privileged people, and you insist on choice. The kids with the greatest needs are told it's one and done. And if the school sucks, that's too bad. Let's hope it'll get better sometime during the kid's lifetime. So when we have a meaningful discussion about the gaps in America and where we're going, we ought to start with the very basics, which is those kids with the greatest challenges should have choice and they should have opportunity. And that isn't going to happen if we relegate them to the worst kinds of education, the kind that none of us would tolerate for our own children. And to me, as long as the status quo serves the needs of adults and not the needs of kids, we're not going to have a 20th century education system. We've got a 19th century education system, resistant to innovation, resistant to change, and really resistant to any meaningful accountability.
Bravo. I'm not even remotely objective here, I should say. Joel inspired me on many occasions and to found this education organization, which I did this year, listening to him on many occasions. But your tenure is sort of being evaluated in a broader context right now because of the mayoral campaign that was happening in New York City. So I'm sure as it's been debated in New York, as you look back, what was the hardest thing? I mean, you certainly didn't accomplish everything you wanted to. You're going in a new direction, looking toward the future now, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if there was one thing that frustrated you more than anything else that you would have liked to have cracked, what is it?
Well, I would have liked to create many more opportunities. I mean, just last year, 70,000 families, almost all families of color, applied for 20,000 vacancies in our charter schools. By definition, that meant 50,000 people were told no. And I wish we had moved more quickly on that front. The second thing I found, and I did this for 8.5 years in New York under a mayor who was unafraid of taking on political challenge. But the thing I found was the amount of time we talked about the interests of the adults, the problems of the adults, and the lack of time we spent on really trying to resolve things for the kids. Those were my greatest frustrations. And I'm sure others in my position feel the same kind of thing. When you know you can be doing so much more, but the politics of the situation really get in the way of create the kind of change that you need.
I would agree. On the anniversary of Dr. King's brilliant speech, I find myself thinking about the fierce urgency of now on a daily basis. For me, the biggest challenge is patience. We have a situation in Newark where we've got about 80 schools, and to me, my job is quite simple. All 80 of those schools should be exemplary. They should be putting kids on the pathway to excel in college and to have access to 21st century careers, and they should all be schools where I put my own son, period, full stop. And right now, I would say that maybe 5 are even headed in that direction. And I'm 2.5 years into my tenure. A system can only grow and change as fast as it can grow and change. But Dr. King called it the poisonous elixir of gradualism. And I have a really hard time balancing my own sense of urgency and the fact that the kid in the 3rd grade doesn't care that I'm at the beginning of my 3rd year, or it's the 2nd year of a contract, or that the politics of Newark are really tough in an election year. They only care it's their only 3rd grade. And for every year we allow them to be in a failing school, we are allowing another generation of young people to grow up with inequitable access to jobs and to the things that they deserve in their life. And so for me, just like Joel, I think the hardest part of this is truly balancing my own sense of urgency and the horrible costs of inaction against the inevitable notion that change is, by definition, a long game. And we were lucky to have Joel for so long in New York City, and I think one of his greatest legacies will be that he kept his foot on the gas for nearly 8 years. The average tenure of a superintendent's 3. And this is not the stuff of deep and lasting change. And so that sense of urgency balanced with a sense of knowledge and patience for me is the hardest part.
What's been the biggest roadblock?
In Newark, sense of possibility. Honestly, when I go from classroom to classroom to classroom, and you hear something over and over again, we must accept this kind of failure because our city is so poor, that we have to wait until we have directly addressed some of the horrible and real challenges of poverty before we can have exemplary schools. And for me, you can go down the hallway and see the same 2 3rd grade classrooms and get radically different results by any measure, right? Take your pick. You can have 2 schools across the street from each other that are getting radically different results. And yet, we somehow think that poor kids, and particularly kids of color, are not capable of academic excellence. Because if we didn't believe that, we would never allow schools to deliver the kind of abysmal results that we do year after year. If you can see success in one classroom, then you must have success in all classrooms. If you can have one school working with the same group of kids achieving here, then there's no reason why you should allow schools to achieve here. It is belief. If we truly believe in the potential of our young people and what is possible, we would never allow the status quo to remain.
I think it was Eric who said this morning in the first session, problems we think we cannot solve that have been around for so long are solvable, in large part thanks to technology. Joel, you're now the CEO of a company called Amplify that could potentially be the key to breaking this impasse, maybe. Explain to people what Amplify is, what it's about, and then let's take it a step further.
Sure. So first of all, after 8.5 years, what I came away with, and I want to underscore what Cami said, because a lot of people may not believe it, and that is the same kids in a different classroom, you'll get very, very different results. That's not to say that poverty and dysfunctional families and all the challenges that many of the kids in the inner city face aren't real problems. But in spite of that, education can be, indeed, in my view, has to be, the game changer, and we've seen it too often. What struck me, though, is in education, we don't think about scalable solutions. So we've had charter schools, and Reed Hastings talked about these earlier. We've had some great charter schools, the KIPS and the Uncommons and so forth. But they're really, right now, they affect maybe 4 or 5% of the kids in America, and they've been at this for almost 20 years. So what struck me is if we're going to really precipitate a revolution, it's going to have to come through precipitating a digital revolution, which will give us scalable mechanisms to do lots of things that we can't do. So at Amplify, we have 3 core principles. 1, data and analytics. We want to be to education what Google is to the internet. We want to really get smarter about our kids. Some kids learn quickly, some kids learn learn in different ways. Some kids need acceleration. One teacher with lots of kids trying to conduct the orchestra is a very dysfunctional way to do work. The differentiation, the customization, the personalization. Second of all, with mobile devices coming down now, and you heard a lot about this morning, the opportunity to really move to one-on-one and think about the benefits of a one-on-one platform for our kids. You can extend the day. You can extend the year. You can be tutoring them in the evenings. You can have them working over the summer in a customized way, driving content to them. You can have them working in groups. Their tablet can be transparent to the teacher's tablet. You begin to create communities of learning that are entirely different from a simple classroom. That's not to say that the teacher isn't the orchestra leader, but it is to say that she can now conduct the orchestra in a much more effective and efficient way. And the third thing we're doing on top of that platform is digital curriculum, bringing the greatest, richest content to support teachers and help them support kids, to differentiate, to learn. So one of the things we've done that we've had enormous positive feedback from kids is we've actually had dramatic readings of the first chapter of very complex books. And when the kids get hooked in, they stay with the book much, much longer. We've created 40 games by some of the great games people. I just saw Jesse Schell interviewed today in the newspaper. Jesse did a game for us called Lexica about a library under siege. And it reinforces the curriculum. And the way you keep your library from getting taken over is through more and more reading. And again, we've done enough with kids to see that this thing is positively reinforcing. So for me, for the first time, it's not just us, it's other people that are doing this. I saw Ron Packer here with K-12. People are beginning to see, and he's just got a new book out, which I'd urge you to take a look at, the potential for a scalable solution. The trick is going to be is the people in power, the people who control it, they really like this 19th century delivery model. And the question is, can we successfully disrupt it with a successful, scalable implementation? And I think the time, for the first time, it feels to me, if I take the pulse of this right, like those shifts are going to happen. 5 years from now, we meet here, it'll be an entirely different discussion.
It's amazing when you think about it that we've been teaching the same way for this long. Is there resistance to the idea? Are you finding that already? Are teachers on board?
You could never do this in a consumer market. The one wonderful thing about what Martin Buber calls the I-thou relationship is when these advances come to the consumer market responds. That's why you see the internet as when you move into an enterprise market like education, there's so much ossification and resistance to change. Now, my own theory is the more you empower teachers, the more they feel helped, the better this is going to be. And I actually think teachers are going to lead the way. I've spoken to so many who said, oh no, not another device, not another sort of change du jour in education. And then they actually get the devices and they start to work with the kids in the tools. So we have a simple thing called a quick poll. And you can literally say to the kids while you're teaching, are you getting this or aren't you getting it? Because if you're not getting it, what the hell are we doing here? And a simple little smiley face pop up and she can figure out what's going on. Things like that are simple, but that really are getting reinforced. So my own sense is this digital revolution is going to take hold because the teachers are going to find it both exciting and empowering. And that's going to then bring the results. And once you get that positive feedback loop going, then I think the flywheel takes off.
And by the way, the New York Times Magazine has a full, I think, amazing piece on Amplify and what Joel's trying to do this past weekend. If you get a chance, take a look at it. But do you think you could get teacher buy-in for these ideas?
So what's interesting is that if you think about the way you shop or bank or do virtually anything in your life now as compared to how you did it 10 years ago, it's radically different. Every industry has been transformed, and that innovation train like screamed past education at the speed of light. We went from the blackboard to the whiteboard. That was our big innovative move. And it's sort of incredible to me how little innovation there has been around both content and delivery. And so I am sort of a curriculum junkie because I actually think that you have to have great people in front of kids. Like if we strip down the research, if you have a phenomenal transformational leader leading the school and they hire terrific teachers and those teachers have access to high quality materials, that's when you see dramatic results, right? Rocket science, not. But we don't have that in education. And so I'm excited to see, I agree, there's a whole new market. I've been at this for over 20 years, believe it or not. And there has been so little in terms of real advancements in the content and the richness of it. I think open source material is changing it, which is great. And I think so too are some of the new advancements and the commitment in technology. It used to be just a bad textbook online. That's not innovation. And so I'm thrilled to see personally the education technology market being populated and led by true innovators. And I am hopeful that 5 years from now, we actually see a dramatic change in the quality of the materials we're putting in the hands of the best people. Because if we get that connection right, great people, great materials, then I think we'll start to see much more breakthrough results at scale as opposed to in pockets.
So let me just ask you on a couple of points. It's going to mean a lot more screen time for our kids, which I think, we have mixed feelings about. There's certainly concerns about that. Privacy issues, possibly, of having all of this information available about our children.
Let me start with privacy. And then, first of all, we're not in the business of upselling kids. So the data should belong to the school district, and they should use it to differentiate instruction and so forth. I need batch data to find out what aspects of my programs are working, where kids are engaged, what teachers like. But I don't need to know that Cammie Anderson or Campbell Brown needs to be accelerated. So I think we ought to be very clear about that, and people should not be using any of that data for commercial purposes. And I think the federal law is clear about that. On screen time, it always strikes me as the question is, what's the kid doing on the screen? If the kid is reading really good literature and has a great e-reader that helps her get through it and is able to write comments that she can preserve or work together in a classroom to solve some of the quests we have. For example, we have one on who killed Edgar Allan Poe. That seems to me to be highly valuable screen time. And so, what's the difference if a kid is reading off an e-reader or reading off a textbook? The one thing an e-reader can do is be much more current, much more flexible, and so forth. So to me, the real question is how we use the time, not just whether it's on screen. And in the end, this is a difference between what's happening in college and K-12. In K-12, the teacher is still going to have to be the classroom conductor. MOOCs are very rare. We have a MOOC for computer science because there's lots of kids in high school who aren't getting computer science. But most of what we're doing is teacher-driven. Our tablet, you click on it literally at any time, and it says eyes on teacher, and the kid can't use it anymore. It shuts the whole thing entirely down. So it seems to me it's got to be the experience, not whether it's on a screen or a paper textbook.
So a great advance, but doesn't solve a fundamental problem, which is great teachers and teacher training. It doesn't take away that challenge, which is probably the biggest challenge.
It can help. In the end, I've said this many, many times, the best investment we can make in human capital is in our teaching force. I know, I watched Cammie when she worked with me in New York, and I've seen what she's doing in Newark to attract human capital. Everybody, whatever company you're at, knows your strongest asset is the people you have. Someday in America, I look forward to the time when teachers will be the most valued professionals in our country. And until we get to that time, we're not going to be where we need to be. But to help us get there, thinking about the tools and the content and the richness, almost 40% of our teachers, everybody talks about STEM, almost 40% of our teachers in science and math are not trained in or certified in science and math. We need to give them the props and the support to help them get there. And that's something that I think technology can help us do. That's not to say we should ever give up on constantly improving the human capital, because that's critical.
And just talk about teachers for a second. What you specifically are doing to try to recruit and train.
Again, so one of the first things I did when I became superintendent in Newark was hire recruiters, which sounds counterintuitive. But my proposition was, back to the 80, have to have a transformational leader at the helm. And I say transformational leader because in Newark, 30% of our third graders can read at or above grade level. So I don't need incrementalists. Anyone who wants to be a principal in Newark and follow orders is not a person I want to come to Newark. I need transformational leaders. So we went about recruiting and aggressively going across the country to find individuals that fit the bill. And we did the same thing with teachers. You need leaders, you need teacher leaders. And I always say you need revolutionaries and visionaries at every single level of the organization. 5% of our special education students in Newark graduate with a diploma that means they've passed any kind of assessment. 5%. So whenever I speak and I recruit and I make videos and PSAs, I spend a good chunk of my time recruiting folks and rewarding folks who are already doing great work in our schools, because it is my belief that if we can truly get change agents and transformational leaders across and throughout the system, then we have a fighting chance. But if everyone's waiting for the person at the top to call a play in a system that's fundamentally broken, we will never see success at scale. And then if we can go on top of that and put in their hands best-in-class materials and tools, now we're talking, and we might be able to sit here 5 years from now and say that we're on the pathway to delivering the American dream for every kid who deserves it right now.
All of us wishing you the best of luck. Cammie Anderson and Joel Klein. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.